We can record it. All right, we're good. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I don't know how early you woke up to get here, but thank you for being here in person. We have some people joining online as well, so thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be our first event of the day. Today's themes that we're exploring are going to be healthcare design, and then later on, we're going to be looking at tech and energy. So today's workshop speaker is Hayley, Riccio, and we're so excited to have her with us. She's a UHID alum, and I'm just going to do a quick bio. And all right. Hayley Riccio is a contract industrial designer in Houston, Texas, starting her business Riccio Industrial Design LLC in 2020. A UHID alum from 2013 to 15, she went on from UH to study product design in Italy, completing her master's at Damis Academy and interning with Italian designer Lorenzo Palmieri. Hayley moved back to Houston in 2018 and started her first commissioned furniture projects for Goodnight Hospitality Group. Since then, she's expanded her contract business in furniture and hospitality. She has designed about 28 unique pieces of furniture for market, draws manufacturing documents for other design firms, and develops prototypes for various industries. Recently, during the COVID pandemic, she worked with surgeons at the medical group Texas ENT Specialists to design and develop a patented endoscopic valve used across their practice to increase safety for physicians, during scopes and debridements. Yeah. Excuse me. Along with her contract business, Hayley enjoyed developing product ideas for her 2-year-old son and building out her catalog of new materials. With that, please welcome Hayley Riccio.
Hello, Zoom people. With that bio, as you can hear, I don't work for I had a very unique experience during COVID, the height of COVID, I should say, back in 2020. And through that process, I ended up developing this valve for a Texas ENT specialist. So I'm going to take you through that whole process, how it came about, what I did, and all the things involved as a designer, as well as things that I guess were surprising. Designer, but you weren't there to so let me pull this up. Feel free to chime in if you can't hear me at any point. So this is it. Named the scope safe valve. The process for today, I'm going to tell you the story of it, a little background on it. When I say get it done again, that's the heart of industrial designers, making, breaking, testing, making some more, breaking, testing, all of that. And then all the way through to pitching it to Texas ENT. As well, I'm going to talk about all this other stuff, lots of acronyms that I got to know, and I'll explain that all to you. It's a little bit big for the screen, that's all right. But going through intellectual property, the emergency use authorization, FDA, all of that. So background, April 2020, this article was produced by some physicians at Mass Gen and Harvard. At that time, there was a lot of information in the ENT community, which is otolaryngologists. They work in ear, nose, throat, so everything in here. Obviously, very dangerous with COVID-19. They were hearing a lot of things from physicians in China, in Iran, in Italy, where the virus was really intense at that time, that those otolaryngologists were getting really sick and undercoming very heavy viral loads of COVID-19. And these physicians at Western and Harvard did this study, released this white paper, this is all public knowledge. And they did studies with heads basically inserting, simulating aerosolization of the virus through sneezes and coughs, and putting color into those droplets so that they can count droplets, see what was happening with aerosolization of the virus or spread of particles. And they developed this thing that they call the vent mask, which basically is to be worn by the patient. So physicians who are wearing the mask, patient wearing the mask, but they can still perform endoscopic procedures through that mask while being protected. And as you can see, it's pretty hi-fi, which is very sarcastic. It is a surgical mask. They cut off a finger from a neoprene glove, exactly as you see. This is a stapler. And they cut off this finger into a little square, stapled it to a mask, made a little incision through which they can insert their scope. And in their study, they actually found that they say there was no transmission of particles in the paper. Basically, it greatly increased the protection of physicians from being in contact with particles from the virus to have the patient also covered. So at this time, I was approached by a couple of surgeons from Texas ENT specialists. My sister is a surgeon, so that's how they know me and what I do. And they said, we need help protecting our physicians. Can you 3D print us a mask for patients to wear? To which I said, quite frankly, I've been following designers responding to COVID-19, and people have been trying to 3D print masks. Hasn't been super successful. And it's not necessarily the best process and material for what you want. Very time consuming, pretty expensive to create a whole mask, probably won't perform like you want it. But we can look at doing an attachment. Right now, the big problem with them, they didn't have any PPE, so they couldn't be cutting up gloves and stapling them to masks. Also, it was really hard to get things shipped around the country. I had also been following, there's a company, probably heard of it, called Formlabs out of Boston. There's another medical device company, Northwell, that made a template for COVID swabs that they were 3D printing with the bioresin that Formlabs produced. So I called them to talk about their bioresin and its capabilities and said, hey, to the surgeons at ENT, I said, hey, this is a possibility that we could possibly create an attachment made out of the bioresin that can be sanitized in enclave, which they needed. And let's pursue that as an option. And we can get it made fast for you here in Houston. So a little bit of the industrial designer part. I put draw, make, test, the draw very small. Sorry, Mark. But I'm sure, as you all know, you have to know your customer, right? And at this time, the surgeons really could care less about drawing. It was more for my process of thinking. So I actually brought them this here for Zoom people. These Post-it notes is what I did. I had about an hour and a half that my son was napping, and I gave myself that amount of time to draw up some ideas and got to printing as fast as I could, because really it was more about the function, if it could work. Found another person that I know that had a printer available, their office was closed, said, hey, can I use it? Started printing. Started with some really basic forms that you see on the left. I didn't put a lot into it. I just thought, let's just make a square and see what happens. Put it on the mask. I had a little piece of silicone. Obviously, this is super broken. There's pins on this. Tried to see how could this puncture the mask? Could it attach? Does it hold? And as you can see in these two, it's pretty basic. This black piece there was a piece of the glove that I picked up from Home Depot. Still trying to get materials, but testing as best we could. That right there is just a pen. These are very, very basic tests at the beginning, just to see what holds, how does it break. And as we moved along in the process, I I mean, I think we broke nearly every single prototype. This gray material, not the bioresin, because I wanted to print out a whole bunch of them, tying up different connector points. This one kind of folds over like a book, playing with, is it 2 pieces? Is it 3 pieces? Where there's 2 pieces just to hold the silicone and then a separate puncture piece. How long should the pins be? What should the joint be like? A snap fit joint? What were the restrictions of the material? And then super, super important, where would this product go? A day in the life of this product. Who are all the different people it would meet when they touch it? What would happen to it for it to be able to perform properly? I should have flipped there earlier. So some of that process that I was explaining there, even to down on the left, that was, I mean, so those are millimeters, and it's just dealing with like thicknesses and fillets and adjusting fractions of millimeters for breaking points. And there's loads of those made just to see what snaps where, at what angle when you're pulling it apart, where does it snap, things like that. This is some of the prototypes that weren't broken. As you can see there, the gray finally moving into the surgical resin, the bioresin, which is this lighter colored material here. It also has different printing properties than the gray resin. So some things had to be changed from there. And we started getting pieces into one particular office just to test. Some things that came along the way, there was no standard mask at that time for patients. They're using whatever masks they could get their hands on. So even times it was like this, construction dust masks, because there just wasn't any PPE, all the way to these N95s that are multiple layers, way thicker, to surgical masks, which are flat. Those others are molded, so it changes how the piece attaches on it. I'd say the big thing here, make sure I don't have it. The big thing that was noticed, which really helped define the end form, is day in the life of the product. The piece actually the surgeons never handled the actual valve attachment. It was only the nurses that prep patients in office for scopes and debridements, which I'll explain a little bit later. And so these individuals also worked on shift work. And so there's a lot of disconnect in communication and what the piece was, how to handle it. And it was getting broken when they were pulling it off. Because just, you know, think about it, you pull it apart at an angle, and it was breaking. And so had to change the joint. First of all, this is a big one. Had to change it from the snap fit to a locking mechanism. That's not what this is. So, see if I can find you a better picture here. Yeah, that middle piece and the flower piece on the right has little nuts where you can insert it and you twist and lock it. And it makes the connection points a little bit more open, not as tight and less prone to breakage. Same with the holes where the pins go. Another one was in this piece right on the right, this teardrop piece wasn't getting placed properly on the mask. And so it would either be too low or too high. So that piece, which used to be just a square with a hole, changed it into a teardrop piece. And the point of it is supposed to sit exactly where the nose sits. So it helps with alignment. It also helps with molded masks if they do end up having to use a dust mask or whatnot, that the pieces get placed properly. And these were incredibly helpful changes. Pieces didn't come back broken anymore. They're getting placed on a mask properly, and we were able to finalize the design and move forward. Another thing that I found super helpful is having, just form-wise, having really recognizable shapes for people to understand how to handle, to remember how they go together. It's not just square, square, square. They have a unique shape that's driven by what it needed to do, how you hold it, but it's also visually memorable for the people handling the pieces. And then another thing to think about is how is that product evolving? What else would that product need to serve? And there's two different things. One that we found through the intellectual property process, which was what other openings, what other sizes could something like this be used for? With this piece, is it only for small incisions to work on the face? There were surgeons at Memorial that contacted the surgeons at Texas A&T and said, well, when we do scopes down into the lungs, we also need our patients protected. But at the same time, for those procedures, they have to have a nasal cannula, the oxygen that sits below the nose. And if they have a mask on, it inhibits the tubes, these little guys. And so it got changed again and basically allowed for that oxygen tube to come in and sit right here at the tip of the nose to provide oxygen to the patient, which I was surprised is all that they needed. They didn't need the whole piece that you normally see with both nostrils. It just needed to be right in front of where the patient is breathing. And so that's where you get this evolution of the scope safe valve. And then it was time to package it up. This is we were working on a very tight schedule to try and get this to physicians as quick as possible. This came after the pitch and Texas A&T decided to purchase it. So it started out with 3,000 units and had to find a way to package it, have the correct verbiage on the back for how it needs to be sanitized properly, how it needs to be stored, which a lot of that came from the actual bioresin itself, as well as batch numbers so that every single piece could be tracked back to when it was made, with what resin, in what conditions, so on and so forth, could keep documentation of it. This is just an example of it being installed on a surgical mask. And this, just to show an example of, there were several different videos made for use, which were really important, both in understanding how the product needed to be changed, how it was used. It was useful in later on talking to medical device companies and talking to other surgeons throughout the practices. This is a debridement. It's actually two separate pieces. So it's a scope as well as another tool that works in the nose to basically clean sinuses. And that's what you have there. A little close up of this gentleman's nasal cavities there. Not very gross for those surgeons, but for us, awesome, I'm sure. And then I'll move in. So simultaneously, a whole lot of other stuff happening. So LLC had to make that ASAP because I couldn't be producing anything that just myself and my home and my family was responsible for. So got that attached to my business. Intellectual property, met with a patent lawyer to talk to us about what that looks like, explain the EUA, which is Emergency Youth Authorization, which is what a lot of materials during the height of the COVID-19 crisis were being produced under. It basically allows you to get the products into the hands of people and physicians before having to go through all the clinical trials and FDA approval. That's what that was. It does not exist anymore. But we had to talk to this patent lawyer to help explain what is this EUA, how do we fall under that properly, to make sure that we're abiding by that correctly, and to start looking at getting some provisional patenting for the device. It was design patents, not utility patents. Those are very difficult in terms of inventing a technology. This wasn't so much about inventing a technology as the form, what it looked like, how it interacted together, and what that was able to use for the design patent. Some of the drawings, which actually I ended up making for the patent myself. So your tools as industrial designers are very useful there. Then to go into licensing, I didn't really want to have ownership of this product and produce it all myself. And so it was a matter of how can I get this licensed to sell to somebody else that has the capabilities and the scale to do so. So started talking to different medical device companies, lots of mutual NDAs. So again, having a lawyer that you can talk to help you understand when they ask you for your NDA and the language in it, to know how to navigate all of that. Within those conversations, having to know, you're basically pitching it to each one of them in very vague terms, which was very strange because they're super secretive about everything. You have to enter into the conversation with understanding that IP has already started. You have to have an understanding of any other products in the marketplace, what they're doing that is similar to yours, how it differs, how yours does something that nobody else does, how much it costs, what are the margins, all of that you have to know for those conversations. For these ones, didn't end up licensing with any of them. Stryker is a medical device company, super large, and they're just like, we're too big. The process would take a year and a half to even like get started on this, just because it's so large. Went to, this is like a sub company, Intersect ENT of Stryker. Went to them because they're a little bit smaller. They were also simultaneously working on something that was very similar. So they basically got engineers and designers that work for them personally, that have their little labs and sit there and design and do tests just for medical device companies. And they were working on something that also involved suction, and said, no, it's too close to what we're already trying to do, so no. And we got forward to Inquis, which is in California, and they also were talking to another company to develop a product that was similar to this. So it was another one. Didn't end up licensing it, by the way, but that's a little bit of the process. And then the next step after that, because the EUA is not forever, is to go through FDA approval. GLP is good lab practice. So you have to develop studies in labs that have the accreditation so that you can move to clinical trials and get your FDA approval. This is a really, really cool place. The Center for Rapid Device Translation is in Houston. It's through Methodist. I highly recommend checking it out. They've got resources for basically you all, for us, for anybody that has an invention, an idea, and how to develop it, how to test it, what that process looks like. Does cost money, but that's always a conversation that can be had. And yeah, I put the website up there so that you guys can check it out. I highly recommend it. So that's the next step. We stopped at this point. The virus was found to not be aerosolized, so it didn't travel in air particles, it traveled in like liquid particles. And so they didn't really need it, which is the end of this story. I know that sounds pretty sad, but that's kind of life. But all that to say, you never know when another virus comes around. And it's extremely useful being able to go through this process, understand how to design for surgeons, understand how to design for their environments, or understanding the life of a product when it enters into an office, into a hospital, understanding all of the necessary authorizations that you have to go through. It's all super useful, and that is the end of my story. I don't know if it's useful, but I brought a whole bunch of little pieces. Some broken, I think there's a few that are still functioning, that take apart and mess with. Yeah, you're free to do so. If there's any questions? Yes.
How long did this process take?
So we started the end of April. We had it in the hands of Texas A&T by mid-June. It was very fast. I will say it was basically every day working on the models to adjust them, redo them, come up with new models, number them, print them overnight, wake up super early, prep the prints, get them off by 7:30, do surgeons to take work. And just did that every day.
Before you presented to Texas A&T, where did you get from?
From the surgeon. So yeah, they put in, I'd say about, it's mostly for the IP, for the materials, the 3D printer we were able to use from another person, so it's printing the bioresin, things for all the packaging. They probably spent about $5,000 total. Majority of that is for the IP.
So is that under your name or is it under this?
In terms of the money that was spent under the surgeon.
Or the IP?
Oh, the IP under my name as well is shared.
I just said. Oh. So do you think that you will continue to work in this realm of ICE development? Or do you feel
Probably not. Probably not. I really enjoyed understanding how to design a form so that people can use it intuitively without explanation, which is really cool of that, is to get this little piece to various different people and say, put this on a master application, and they could look at it and be like, oh, this is the part, that twist, put it on, there you go for the surgeon. That I really enjoyed a lot, and I think that I've been able to apply in pretty much every single project had taken from that point and from my goals going forward. I think that's super important, actually. It's to make it to the form.
We have a question from the chat. Looking back, if you could have done anything differently, what would it be?
I think I think I would have liked to follow through on the FDA approval and the clinical trials, just to understand that more, see where it goes. It was a chunk of money. It was definitely no less than $10,000. And so it also needed buy-in from somebody else because I didn't have the money to put towards this project. So I think I would have really liked to have fallen through on that. In terms of the little steps along the way, it's actually something I feel really proud of in terms of being able to come up with multiple iterations of the form in a short period of time and test them and actually take the information back from the test to define what the end form ended up being.
I have a personal question. Well, not personal, but a question for me. Do you think like aesthetics have any value in a product like this, or is it more so just making this form like functional?
That's a very good question. Both would be my answer. Obviously, the utmost importance is that it works, that it's effective, that it doesn't break, that it's safe, all of those things. And really, whatever the form needs to be to make that happen is what it needs to be. At the same time, the form needed to have certain aesthetics to appeal to the minds of the users in both how they handled it, how they touched it, what they saw as piece, like the hierarchy of the pieces, like 1, 2, 3, what's most important. I recently had a conversation with some designers at NASA, which is also very engineering heavy. They also need pieces to work and function exactly and precisely. Aesthetics is really important to them as well. It's actually, it feeds into the health of human performance and the fact that these products are being used by people. They're being used by humans that their eyes are attracted and motivated to some things more than others, which influences how you use them. And so I was actually surprised to hear how much aesthetics were actually important to them, designing like buttons inside the logo.
So I can look through this project. What is your impression of the ways that's been part of the industry? You kind of talking about sanitized ways, so is this something that we use?
Yeah, and I don't know if I can speak to the waste of the medical community because I'm sure there's a lot of necessary reasons that needs to be. The main reason why they needed to reuse these pieces is that there was a big lack of access to materials. They just couldn't get it. They couldn't get gloves, masks, anything. And so when they have one physician has multiple patients throughout a day, there's say 5 physicians in each practice, multiply that over 15 practices, a lot of people in a day, and they needed something that they could reuse. The only way to do that was to sanitize it really to a certain temperature.
You did mention that, you know, coronavirus and everything, but I think
beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that like they figured out that the particles that they're so healthy and it's just like fits into the doctors. So I don't understand why they stopped using the device.
So that white paper that I was talking about at the beginning, the studies, they were actually looking at aerosolization. So the medical community at the beginning of COVID-19 thought that COVID-19 was air particles. They didn't have enough testing to understand fully what the virus was, how it was transmitted. Later on, we found out it's actually in moisture. It's not just in the air, which for the studies for physicians is a very big difference, super, super big difference. Because with aerosolization, it's the transmission is exponentially higher. Once they realized that it just went in the moisture molecules, they found that having the physicians themselves covered was enough for them. So that's all part of the learning process. The medical community was passing information from country to country saying our doctors are getting crazy sick. There was information about higher, lower viral loads. They needed to find out more about that. Studies, cadaver heads, stream flow masks, with fingers and gloves, and then that's where we ended up. Yeah.
I'm just a little bit curious about the research that you had to go through with the project. So like when you approach, how much, I'm just trying to get a picture of like, were you intimidated? Were you like happy with the research and all that? How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, I sat down and read that study at Harvard, and it's for the most part, it's like, okay, I can understand this. There's definitely a lot of terms in that. I didn't understand endoscopies. I didn't know what a debriefing was. I didn't know what their tools were that they used. What were in-office procedures versus when they had to go to a hospital to perform their procedures, because otolaryngologists are all surgeons. I didn't know any of that. It's super intimidating. And so I just asked. And so it was basically coming from a material standpoint, which I know surgeons do not know. I was saying, I think this makes the most sense based on the fact that you want it to be reusable. You need it to cover the patient. You need it to be made fast, and you need it to be made here. And this is the idea that I have for you here right now. And so that makes a lot of sense. Let's develop it. So that's what you got. It just went straight into let's start making as many forms as we can and test as many as we can as fast as we can to get to work. But yeah, it's really good for sure.
So since you had previously worked in product design, how did you know to approach you in this project?
So my my sister is an ENT with Texas ENT specialists. So the practice that she works in, by association know her and the other surgeon is there. So her and another surgeon, Dr. Tom, said they had the idea like we should have a 3D printed mask. That's a great solution. Not really understanding a whole lot about 3D printing process. And so they said, hey, you know how to do that. Can you make this one? Which I said, doesn't make a lot of sense, not the best. I didn't say it that way. Say it in a really nice way. They're very, very smart people. But that's not the best application for that material, which is something that they do understand. So, but that process could be used in another way that could be very effective for what you want to do.
I think the best takeaway is the message, albeit perfectly direct, is exposing everyone to the fact that it's not necessarily in the process. When you're in the industry and you run into so many hurdles that rock the road, and a lot of times the book sinks.
Yeah.
You know, and money's a big issue. That was one for a patent, you know, $50,000 pound, whatever. So, a lot of this.
This, yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot. And just because a product doesn't get licensed and I become a bazillionaire, doesn't mean by any means that it's a billionaire. And I really don't know the life of this little product or the evolution of it, what it will be. But 100% as industrial designers, that process is invaluable. The experience is invaluable. And as industrial designers that have been practicing, you have the tools in your mind, in your hands, your knowledge, and your experience to say, hey, this being what I know and what I specialize in, I can apply that to this field. Let's work together. As designers, we're really, really good at understanding different people and how products can work for different people. All of that is super. That is a success. So that's something to keep in mind. Your products can work.
So much. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Our next session is going to be a panel on healthcare design. Continuing on, Hayley's going to be joining us as a panelist as well. But before we head out, are you guys cool with taking a group photo in front of the TV with our Zoom guests? If that's okay. All right, cool. Last together. All right, guys, if you guys are cool with staying in just for a couple minutes, we're gonna take a group photo. If you don't mind turning on your camera. Just stand in front of the table. Come on in. Stand in the back. Are they getting blocked? We should have. Show me behind the. I'm pretty tall, you can see me.
Now you're ready to go.
Okay.
Turning into a hole.
Sorry.
There you go.
Sure, my eyes are closed.
Thank you.
I was like blinking.
Thank you to all
I was
our
like
online
blinking.
people.
Okay.
And then she would.
Bye.
And then I hear.
Come back in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, or you can like stay on the call, I guess, because it's gonna be the same link.
Yeah. We can leave.
It's $1.
Yeah.